Good evening, friends, neighbors, and fellow Winchester residents. Welcome to the next forum sponsored by Future Winchester, which is focused on the basics of municipal finances here in our town. My name is Steve Boksansky, and I'm your host for tonight's discussion. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Future Winchester for putting together this important program and giving me the opportunity to participate. Website. We'll be covering an historic look at revenues, property values, classes, and capacity, as well as our expenses, including education, public safety, public works, and personnel. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's turn it over to John and get started. John, this is our first graph. We're going to start by taking a look at the average family tax bill from 1988 to 2022 today. Please explain this graph in your observations.
Yes, sure, Steve. Thank you. Thanks for having me again. So the red line shows is the average single-family tax bill paid by an average homeowner in Winchester of a single-family house. That's the red line, and you can see it. The black line is Consumer Price Index, inflation from the Federal Reserve, tied to 1988. So we've married them at the same point in 1988, and you can see how they have diverged. For the first 15 or so years, you can see that the tax bill kind of tracked CPI pretty well, and then we had a burp in about 2002 where it jumped, and in 2017 it began to jump again. So the steeper that red line is, the faster we're moving away from inflation rate.
Any observations or insights that sort of put us on that path, on that big jump, and then really growing at a real fast rate?
Well, I think it's the collective decisions by select boards and school departments, and there's nothing inimical in there. It's just the history of the average tax bill, but it's the tax bills are going up.
Great, thank you, John. Revenue and historic look. Next few slides, we're going to take a look at that historic revenue perspective, and we're going to give John some time to explain. We're going to start with the key revenue groups. Please take it away, John.
Yeah, the town really has 4 key revenue groups, and they're shown on this chart. The green is property taxes, and you can see what an important piece property taxes are of total revenues. The light blue are local receipts. Those are excise taxes on cars and boats and personal property, and they're the dump fees. The red is state aid. You can see how state aid has changed a little bit. It's been pretty steady, but it grows a little bit as time goes on. And then on top is free cash that we've had appropriated cash. Sometimes we have cash balance, and we use that to fill. We use that as a revenue source.
Great. Thanks for that explanation, John. Let's move on to the next slide. Like everyone else, I get a personal property tax bill for my automobiles each year, and along with my cost to get my transfer station sticker, which I really love this year. They look like this. They have the W, and they're really cool. I'm glad somebody finally did that. That's a great idea. Thank you.
It is a good touch.
But let's talk about vehicle excise taxes.
Well, this is just a breakout of those 2 items, and it's not insignificant. Excise taxes are about $4 million a year. That you can see the dip from when COVID hit in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. There was quite a drop in excise taxes. People weren't buying cars, and so that dipped, but it's moving back up. And then the orange is service charges. Those are the dump fees. So between those 2 items, that's almost $6 million of our budget. It's not insignificant. It's would buy a lot of lunches.
Yeah, so I'm thinking motor vehicle excise taxes, property taxes. This is all starting to add up. Here we go. Winchester property tax growth versus CPI is our next slide. And
yeah, this is just making kind of the same point. You can see that the black line is CPI, and these are tax receipts for property taxes. So these are not the excise taxes, not the dump fees, but this is just property taxes. And instead of an average property tax bill that we showed in one of the earlier slides, this is total property tax receipts across the town. And you can see for a long period of time between 1981 and probably 2001, we were pretty close to, we were growing about the same rate as the CPI, and then we've moved away from it, and growing our property tax revenues at a faster rate than the consumer price index.
All right, so the obvious question is why? I assume some of that is maybe we have more houses in Winchester and that's driving it, but also the valuations have increased?
Yeah, we're going to get to valuations. The valuations have been on a rocket ship, and we'll show you that in an upcoming slide.
Okay. So the next few slides, that's what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Property values, classes of property, and property class mix from 1985 to 2023. This next slide here, we have growth in townwide property values.
So this is that rocket ship I just mentioned. The green curve is the total property value in the town. Across the town. It's a big number.
Wow.
And that has gone up from about $1 billion in 1986. So as I was saying, that's quite a rocket ship. You can see there's a couple bumps back in around 1990 when I think that was a revaluation. You can see some big jumps from one year to the next, and you see some periods of leveling. But we're back up. We're rising in property values at quite a clip. And if you look, it's I think I computed more than 1,000% real estate value increase since 1985. So
Wow.
we bought our house in 1985. It just happens, and we've been in the house for a long time. But the property values have gone up 10 times. Least.
Yeah, so I
Almost 10
imagine most communities around Greater Boston in particular are seeing similar increases. Is that true?
I think it depends a little bit on the community. There's probably some communities that it's higher than ours, and but we're near the top of the property value chain.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, and here we have property tax values again. Let's talk a little bit about this slide.
This is showing you the mix of the property tax. So this is the same cumulative amount of property tax receipts, but it shows you a little bit of the mix. So the red shows you the single family through residential, class 1 residential properties. The yellow on top of the red is commercial, the class 3 commercial properties. And then on top of that is I guess it's blue, is the what is known as class 1 and class 3. And it's a multi-use. Those are multi-use properties that have both commercial and residential elements to them. And then class 4, the blue, it's so small you can hardly see it, is industrial. It's a summary. There's many more.
Okay. Next slide here. This pie chart shows all property classes by percentage of total property value. It shows we are heavily reliant on single-family and condominium homes. That's not a surprise to anyone in town for the property tax revenue. And let's talk a little bit about this mix.
Yeah, again, this just is a simpler way of looking at the mix. So, single-family homes and condominium homes, they're more than 90% of the value. You see up in the upper left of the pie chart, there's 3-family homes, 2-family homes. They add quite a bit to the property mix, but by the time you get down to commercial, industrial, and that multi-property value, it's a very, very tiny percentage of total property value in the town. It's 2 to 3%, which is unusual. We are among the unusual towns in the state in this respect. A town like Lexington, has quite a substantial commercial base. So the commercial property tax is shouldering a little bit more of their total expense needs than we have in Winchester, and that would vary from town to town.
Thank you. Moving on, now we are looking at a similar pie chart, but this slide shows a similar breakdown, but uses the number of properties in each class rather than the percentage. Why'd you make this chart?
Well, it just shows you how few properties we have in some of these classes. For example, in commercial, I'm having a little bit of trouble reading. I think it's 200. There's only 207 pieces of commercial class 3 property in town. There's only 17 properties that are industrial. And there's only 29 that are class 1 and 3 multi-use. So I add those up quickly. There's not too many pieces of property in town. A small changes in those numbers could make an interesting difference on our tax base.
Okay, so maybe more development downtown, or?
Well, I think we ought to be, cautiously looking for opportunities to add, multi-use space, for example, in the CBD. There are some new buildings. I think the Fells project is an example of that's going to be replaced. There will be a multi-use commercial and residential building. That's going to be an add to the commercial tax base. It's a good thing if you're worried about your property tax bill.
Yeah, so that leads me to a question about, is this a trade-off between more commercial space in town versus higher property taxes? Is there a nexus or relationship
I think
there?
it's a complicated one, and it's a complicated answer because it depends on what people want to choose to do with their own property and how they might want to develop it. But the Fells project is a good example of the kind of change that could happen. It has to be done carefully, and obviously it has to be done in accordance with the zoning laws and all that, but, we should have our ears out and our ears and eyes out a little bit, it seems to me.
Okay, thank you, John. Now moving along, slide number 13, we're talking about Winchester tax levy versus statewide average municipal tax levy. John, please.
So you asked why I did this chart, and so there are two stories here. The two green lines are connected. The dark green line at top is the residential tax levy percentage average for the state, and the light green line at the bottom is all other classes: commercial, industrial, multi-use commercial. So the rest of the state relies on less residential tax revenue, property tax revenue, on average than Winchester does. The red and black, Winchester's colors, are the other two lines on this chart, and that shows Winchester's reliance on residential property taxes up near 94, 95%, and its reliance on other classes is down around 5%.
Great. Okay, next slide. Now, we're going to transition to property tax capacity, not a term that I'm familiar with 100%, but I'm going to learn a lot, so please take it away.
So, most people know about Proposition 2.5, which says it has two swinging anvils in it. So you can't tax property more than 2.5% of its value. And in any one year, you can't raise property taxes more than 2.5% over the prior year. We have our skyrocketing property values, which are the total, we mentioned before, $9 billion. There is room, if there's an override, we could raise another $200 million in property taxes. See, that green line on this chart is the capacity left. If the town chose to, and this should send shivers through most property tax ratepayers, but there's the opportunity, we have the ability through an override to dramatically raise more money, because property values have gone up much, much more quickly than 2.5% per year. So this is. So
there's a lot of room to borrow here. There's want to.
There's a lot of room to raise property taxes, not borrow.
Okay.
Not borrow.
Thanks for clarifying that, John. Let's take an historic look at headcounts, students, and staff from 1988 to 2023.
Yeah, this is headcounts. Headcounts means a lot. People don't think about it. They don't think about it as how it translates into everything else. But it's really the biggest driver of expense in the town, both in any of the departments or in any of the or in education. The first slide describes student headcounts, and it's interesting. The gold at the bottom is pre-K population. The green on top is the largest, and that's kindergarten through 5. There's 6 grades in there. That's why there's a lot of green. There's 3. The next is the McCall, the middle school, which is red. The red student the population is McCall, and then the high school population is from 9 through 12, and that's of course bigger than the McCall population. They have another grade, but that's in black. So the total, these are stacked. So that's the total population in the schools over the last 30 years, 40 years. It's gone down over the last couple years, and you can see that beginning in about 2019, it plateaued probably in 2016, 17, and 18, and has been dropping for the last couple years. The school superintendent projects another decrease in the entering population in the kindergarten, so we expect that to go down again in FY23. There's an interesting part of this is that you can see that the K through 5 population began to drop before the total population did. So that's been occurring since about 2015, and those grades are walking their way through the system.
And would you say that is a result of fewer families in town, or is it a result of families choosing other options for education?
We don't have any precise data on that,
Okay.
but right now we're back to student population levels of 2012.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful. All right, and now we're going to look at the number of students which are special education students and non-special education students. So the non seem to me like they far outweigh the special ed students,
Yeah.
and everyone would say
of
that's
course.
normal, that's typical. This chart looks pretty stable to me.
Yeah, I think it is, but so this is side-by-side special education students and so those are students with an independent education plan, an IEP, and in black is students without IEPs. And the population has been pretty stable, and that's of interest, even though the total school population has gone down over the last few years. The SPED population has been pretty stable. It's about 14 to 17% of the population, of the total population.
Okay. Now we're moving on to available headcounts, full-time employees, as you noted. And if you've been around town meeting or if you've been around finance committee, you know that full-time employees are a major cost driver. We hear that every year from the town manager, from the finance committee. How are we doing here, and what's this chart say?
Well, these are stacks. So we don't have a lot of historical data from going back, back in the 90s and the 80s. But what's striking about this to me is that the non-school headcount has grown a little bit, but it's an up and down, but it's pretty stable. What's shown in the green on this chart. School headcounts have been going up, and I would expect that to continue. I think that's a trend. And when you think about the last slide, headcounts are going up while school population is going down. So so I think, and it's just part of the way the education system is running.
Okay. Okay, now this chart shows a breakout of the education headcount by function. What are the trends we're seeing here?
Well, this is a complicated chart. I recognize that. So in the front is central office. That's the dark blue running along the front row, and then behind that is athletics. That's the athletic director. That's the athletic department. Then you walk back and you get to the schools. So Ambrose and the 5 elementary schools, their headcounts are virtually. They're static. They might move 1 or 2 maybe, but they do not move. The McCall is very stable. The high school is very stable, and then you see in the back in red is the special education headcount, which that is what's driving headcount in the the reason for this chart is to show that we're not adding classrooms so much as we're adding extra people outside of those classrooms to help kids. Okay.
So administrative help?
No, it's mostly it's special education education assistants.
Great.
And there's an increase in the central office. There's an increase here and there, all scattered throughout the system, but a lot of it is in special education.
All right. Thanks for that explanation. Let's move on to the next slide. We have this chart shows available water and sewer, police, fire, and DPW headcounts over the years, and what are the trends shown here? Well,
again, we're missing some years from way back in the 80s, but the DPW shrunk quite dramatically when the water and sewer department was created out of DPW. So you see in the old years, there's no water and sewer in those out years.
They were all lumped together.
They were all in the DPW. Yeah. So, but you look at this, and those numbers are very stable. fire and police really haven't moved. I think there's, they're not moving. The water and sewer department is stable, DPW is stable. So there's not a lot of headcount change in those departments.
Okay, thank you. Now, we are looking at small municipal department headcounts, full-time employees from 2003 to 2023. Let's talk about this.
So people sometimes ask, well, what about headcounts everywhere else? And so most of these departments are in town hall. So it's the town clerk's office, the controller, the town manager's office, the engineering department, planning board, and you'll see that these headcounts, they're small, but they are not moving. HR grew. HR didn't exist probably 15 years ago. HR department has grown a little bit, but that's really an overhead item that they serve all the departments in the town except for education. But so these numbers are very stable. There's not a lot of change, and people in these departments are working very hard. They're great, but they're doing a lot, and their headcounts aren't moving too much.
So steady number of employees, more work. Everyone has a little more responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's going on, and they're working hard.
And so what do we do for the future? I mean, do you care to go down that road a little bit? I mean, if you're looking in manufacturing, obviously you're looking at automation in some of the service industries. Automation is a way to address headcounts. I don't know if we can do that in town government.
I don't know. As I've said it several times, it seems to me we insist on everyone being able to pay by check, by credit card, by ACH, by fax, by email. Every mode of communication is open, and we don't make the world simple for people down in town hall or the DPW. We're demanding. We're demanding customers in a pleasant way. I don't mean that in a bad way, but we're demanding.
But there are efficiencies to be gained.
I think so. I think there a lot of my background is in the construction industry, and not always clear that the technology add makes the world simpler. But some wise upgrades, and certainly in technology, I think the town clerk and other offices could certainly use that, and certainly the controller, the treasurer. Some system upgrades might be in the offing in the future.
Sure, that sounds great. Now let's take an historic look at expense. We'll be covering town, education, and undistributed categories here over the next few slides. First up, we have the Winchester direct expenditures versus CPI. Give us a little color here.
So what this is, the key word here is direct. So direct expenditures, and what I mean by direct is, and what we've meant in town budgets forever, is the out-of-pocket cost of the person's salary, the widget you bought, the truck you bought, the direct expense. This does not include the overhead expense of, unemployment, insurance, unemployment compensation, healthcare coverage. So this is the direct expense, and this is total direct expense for the people and the widgets, the trucks, the fire trucks, the gasoline, total direct expenditures, and you can see how that compares to CPI since 1990. And again, it's the slope, it's how steep that red line is versus the steepness of the black line that is a little bit concerning. I wouldn't say it's alarming. We've been living with it for 30 years. It's because property values are on that rocket ship, and we in the back of our heads, we know that we probably can figure out a way to survive it, but.
Well, we all know now because we talked about that capacity, right? So we know that override capacity.
Yeah, but that override capacity is not necessarily one that everyone wants to go grab.
Right.
So that's one of the biggest issues.
All right. Thank you, John. Now, The big four direct expense items, another thing that I'm not 100% familiar with. I don't know what the big four expenses are, but probably common sense, and please tell us a little bit about those.
So what, these are kind of the four big buckets, and we started charting this a few years ago, and I think Alan McDonald, probably back in 2000, actually, we looked at some of the larger expenses in the budget and tried to track what those were doing. So what's shown in green, that's DPW. That's not without the water and sewer, because the water and sewer operates by themselves. They're an enterprise. They pay for their own bills. They pay for their own health care. They pay for themselves. They charge for what they're doing. The blue is public safety. That's fire and police put together. The yellow is what I call, I think that's employee benefit package.
Yep.
So that's just the part of the overhead for the employees, the headcounts. And then red is the education, the headcount at education plus the stuff that education buys. So you can see that fire, police, DPW are they're modestly increasing, and that's you'd expect with CPI, cost everything going up. So this is just the trends, and you can see that our cost of education is growing at a higher clip.
Yeah,
these are direct
obvious.
Expenses. These are direct
Right,
expenses
right.
without overhead.
The red bars here really jump out. Let's move on to the next one. The big four direct expense items.
So this is the same slide as the last slide, only instead of side by side, they're stacked on top of each other. So the bottom is DPW, the blue is fire and police, the yellow is the I forget the employee benefit package, the pension and healthcare.
Healthcare.
And then on top of that is the education direct expense.
Okay. And so this to me sort of covers the basics
kind of
looks of town government.
That's a big percentage of the total expense line, and it doesn't include the smaller departments in town hall that we mentioned earlier. But these are the three certainly are the biggest expense line items.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. Everyone would agree that these are really the cornerstones of local government.
Yeah,
right?
and you can't. I mean, no one wants to starve schools. It's
Right.
dependent on property values. So bad schools, bad for property values. No one wants to fire the. No one wants to fire the. Fire and police. None of those activities can or should be starved.
Totally agree there, buddy. Let's move on to the next. This slide we have. This is total undistributed, and this sounds. I'm not sure exactly about undistributed. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Let's take a minute or two to sort of describe this, because I think this is important. And let's talk about undistributed.
Sure. So there's the line item in the town budget called undistributed. These are costs that are incurred by most departments. The teacher's pension is taken care of elsewhere. The teacher's pension is not. It's undistributed. So if this number is getting to be of a size, 24 million, that's the size of the expense for police, fire, and DPW combined. And it's getting to be a big number. It can be broken out and it can be distributed so that we would have better information about what the actual cost of things are.
Category. Question two. How do we compare to other towns in this regard? If you know.
I don't know how other towns do this. That's a good question, and I should spend some more time looking at it. But typically, an undistributed item would be, for example, the town buys health insurance. I'm sorry, the town buys general insurance. So there's property damage. Someone's driving a town vehicle and there's an accident. So you buy that as the town. You can't various departments.
I see.
You can't distribute. The Finance Committee has a reserve fund that is available in case anybody in town needs money for some emergency. They can come to the Finance Committee and we will backfill if there's an unexpected expense. So that reserve fund can't be allocated to schools or can't be allocated to the police or the fire department because we don't know where it's going to be spent. So those kinds of items are illegal, is another example of a truly undistributed. It should be undistributed because you can't really distribute it. So there's those kinds of expenses that really don't make sense to distribute, but there's a lot of, that's about $2 million of this $23 million. And my own view is that this money should be allocated out to the departments so that we have a better sense of like what are we spending. I mean, if all of our property claims are arising from one thing, we should know that. But that's an undistributed item, insurance. It's fine.
Got it. Thank you for that explanation and providing that insight. Next slide, we're on to, excuse me, loaded direct and overhead expenses expense major departments. So let's explain about
So this is if from the prior slide, if you looked at undistributed, like it is calculable, and in 2022 we did the calculation in FY22. We allocated healthcare costs out to the departments. We allocated the pension funds, pension liability, the payments for pensions out to the departments. So what you're looking at here is what I call, it's the loaded allocation of expenses by the major departments. So at the left of each of these years is police, and then to the of town government is the light blue, and then the schools are the red. So this gives you a clearer picture about, well, where is the money going? Not only the direct expense, but the overhead expense. So it's like if you buy a car and you borrow money on the car, the cost of the car isn't the only price you paid to the dealer. It's the price you paid plus the mortgage, and then this is total cost.
Okay, that's helpful. Again,
so what we did was we calculated this for 2022, and then we took those percentage allocations and assumed that would apply in 2023, and we went back 10 years to 2011. So it's calculated for 22, and it's, we think, close for the years shown on the chart.
And so all of this shows that we're spending a lot on education. We put a primary...
as we should.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say, that we place special importance here in our town on our public schools, on our education system. So it's no surprise to see these numbers.
It's probably the biggest driver of property values in the town, the quality of our schools. No doubt about it.
Great. All right, moving on. Now we're moving on to loaded direct and overhead expense by major department. What does this chart show?
This is
about
a similar
Winchester's?
chart.
Yeah.
It just does it in 3D, so you can get a sense of what this looks like. And I probably we spent a lot of time on the past slide. This is the same thing. The departments are on the right-hand side, and on the front is the years. People. I think I think we're going to make better decisions if we have kind of a better understanding of the situation. I am the biggest fan of education, and it was the most important reason my wife and I moved to Winchester. It was incredibly important to my children. I'm sure it's important to you, and it's important to your children. That's true for all of us. It's a huge driver, but we ought to be looking at the right numbers.
Absolutely, yep. That makes all the sense in the world. Thank you, John. The next slide, this seems to show, let me actually have you actually explain this rather than try to describe it myself.
So this
Please, John,
is
dig into
the same chart as two
Yeah.
charts ago, only I added all the little departments together. So it's DPW, fire, police, the library, the planning department, everyone together is in the blue, and so you get a sense of, we're spending two-thirds of our loaded expenses on education, which is fine. I have a little bit of bugaboo about this. I look at the $23 million of undistributed, and I always want, well, where should that be distributed to? And so what's shown on this chart in yellow, those are the funds that are really, it doesn't make sense to distribute. So for example, audit. We hire an auditor to audit the town's books. You can't allocate that to a department. Legal, general insurance, the reserve fund I mentioned. Someone sues us and tags the town for a court judgment. That should be undistributed. So, and human resources, of course, HR.
All right. All right, let's move on. We're on to our next category. We're going to be talking about debt. Not a fun topic for a lot of people, and but it's a reality, and it's a part of financing. So it shouldn't be shunned. It plays an important role in town finances. Let's talk a little bit about this. Debt service left to pay before the next spring town meeting. Let's talk about this chart a little bit.
Yeah, the title, I realized that the title is a little bit wrong. It's not that we have to pay this before the spring town meeting. That would be a big check.
Yeah.
So what I meant the title to convey is that this is how much debt is outstanding as we go into town meeting. It's broken out by the total outstanding principal is in blue, and for all town departments is in the left set of columns. The school department is in the middle. The water and sewer department is to the right of that, and then total is over on the right. So we owe a total debt service of about $190 million now outstanding that we've already incurred in the past. People before us decided to do it, and we are here paying that debt off. We have $190 million to go. A lot of that is in the school department, and of course those are schools, and those are it's the high school, it's McCall, it's VO, it's the improvements to the Morocco school to keep it going. So but I think people need to understand that there's been a substantial commitment to refurbish and rebuild some of the major infrastructure assets, and these kinds of decisions last for a while. I mean, they're 25-year commitments that we undertake a debt, and people behind us, and those of us who are still here, need to pay those debts off.
Makes sense. Thank you, John. Next up, what does this slide show about the town's commitment to school and water and sewer and building projects and everything else?
There's two charts here. The dark purple is the current debt service. There's a line item in our budget called debt service, and each year the town meeting approves in the budget a line item for debt service. And so the purple is what those debt service, prior to today, those are the debt service numbers that were in the budgets over the last 25 years, 22 years. From fiscal 23 forward, in purple are the remaining obligations we owe. So that's the $190 million we just talked about in the last slide. And that shows how it steadily declines over time because we're paying principal off, we're paying interest off, it's going down. The other colored charts, the kind of reddish charts, those are the Lynch school in 2023, early 2023, and behind it, hypothetically is the Morocco rebuild in 2027. So those two spikes coming on are the debt service that we should be expecting to include in town budgets going forward between now and 2050. So it's these are, as I said, these are decisions that last.
All right, thank you for that perspective, John. Now onto the next slide. This slide shows the town's pension liability status. Let's talk a little bit about that. I know that's a subject that we've heard of before. It's a subject that you hear of almost any time you listen to a finance committee meeting
Yeah.
or a town manager's report. And it's not just Winchester that has this type of liability. Every city and town in Massachusetts, to some degree or another, incurs some of this. But let's hear your perspective.
Yeah, well,
on how we're
these
doing
are
here.
just the numbers, and, in the 7 o'clock session, we're going to have Michelle Pryor and Roger Michelson with us, and they're two former FinCom chairs, and they'll have more to say about our pension and Opeb liabilities. But these are just the numbers, and on the pension side, the town has done pretty well. We have made payments. We have really reduced our pension liability. Our funded pension payments are approaching $140 million. Those liabilities are funded. So those monies are invested, and God willing, our investments willing, most of our pension liability should be funded. And there's about a $23 million liability that is unfunded. But every year you'll see in the line item, there's a line item in the town budget where we are paying a little bit more money into a fund to reduce that pension liability each year. And the plan, it moves out a little bit, but the plan is that by 2030, the pension liability, unfunded pension liability, will be zero.
I like the sound of that. Let's move on to the next slide. And here, John, we have other post-employment benefits, also known as OPEB.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this fun acronym.
So this is a frequent topic in FinCom as well. It doesn't get enough attention in town meeting. It's kind of, usually it's the last, it gets a couple minutes in town meeting. But our OPEB liability, this is done by actuarial consultants, and in 2021, the liability they guess for these are health coverage, health insurance coverage for current and former retired employees. So it was about $120 million. A very small amount of that is funded. It's about $5 million. So this is what pensions used to look like maybe 20 years ago. We're not very well funded, but a lot of liability out there, and there's no specific plan in place to deal with this. The numbers are pretty big. It's an issue.
Yeah, and so what's the call to action here? If
Well,
there is one?
I think, I'm not sure Winchester's in any different position than any other town, and as I mentioned, Roger and Michelle will have more to say about that. It's related to negotiating with contracts and things like that. There might be some things to do like that. We also probably need to figure out a funding strategy, at least to pick away at this. The current budget, I believe, we probably I think it's $350,000 a year that it goes into OPEB liability, but that's
Again,
kind of
this is one of those costs
kind of a
that-
drop in the bucket.
Yeah, that all municipalities do incur.
Yep.
It's not something that everyone's talking about on the street, around the water cooler, but
No.
it is an important part of municipal finance.
It is.
That needs to be addressed, that cannot be ignored.
I think that's fair.
Okay, thanks. Let's move along here. OPEB liability by department. Let's talk a little bit about what's in this chart.
So remember a few slides ago, we looked at undistributed, and there was a big number, the big blue bars. So it is possible, I know, but way back from 2000 in the Facts Committee, we recommended that all the undistributed be allocated out to the departments, and it will happen eventually. But it is calculable, and this is part of the calculation we did in 2022 on FinCom with the controller to break out OPEB liabilities by department. So you can see, this is one of those items driven by headcount. So if you have a lot of headcount, you have a lot of OPEB liability. So it's again driven by headcount. It's when you add a person, you're adding OPEB liability, pension liability, et cetera. So this is just kind of a look at where those liabilities are spread by department. And maybe 20 years ago, the argument was that maybe we couldn't break these out, but these numbers are known.
Okay, thank you, John. And look, we've reached close to the end of our program already. That is a lot to digest. I'm going to have to go back and watch this one a couple times myself, I think, to really get into the details. There's a lot going on here, and the point I want to make is we're lucky to have people who run for office to serve this town. We're lucky to have people who volunteer their time for Finance Committee. This is an extraordinary, I wouldn't call it a burden, but it's a liability. It's a big commitment.
There are some incredibly talented people on FinCom. There really are.
Unsung heroes of the town in many regards, I would say, because this is the stuff that, again, your average resident doesn't want to pay attention to this stuff. They're like, no, I know somebody on Finance Committee, they're taking care of it. So thank you to all those who are serving in that capacity. Let's open it up for any questions. Do we have any questions from the audience?
How they're going to pass.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap things up then, John. This has been, like I said, very informative, highly detailed presentation. I really do appreciate this opportunity, and I hope the folks of Winchester appreciate this information as well. We think it's valuable. We want to provide this information so people can be informed, so they can be educated, and so that when they do engage in civics and town government, that they know what's going on here at the local level. There's a lot to digest here, like I said, but thank you, John, very much.
Yeah, sorry, it is a lot to digest. It's a fire hose, but I think it's fairly straightforward, actually, when you get a feel for it.
Absolutely. So I want to, again, thank the team from Future Winchester for sponsoring this event and helping us develop the content and the format. Definitely want to thank the folks here at WinCam who've done another great job of providing us this access and making sure that all the residents of Winchester have the opportunity to learn about this important information that we have discussed tonight. Finally, thank you, John Miller, for being here, for answering all these questions and going through this detailed presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And if you flip to the next, I think there's one more slide. If people are interested in getting the slide deck, it's available from Future Winchester. So, our goal is to disseminate this information, not to hold it.